Thank you, and welcome once again to Confession Shadow Secrets. On today's episode, we will be covering a number of stories, so please stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and comment your theories and hot takes on each story. Without any further delay, let's get into the first story, which is titled The Ghost That Keeps Following Our Family. In 2012, my family moved to North Carolina. The last house we lived in had a demon or shadow person in it. The main event that still gives me nightmares now and then today, I had woken up one morning and found out the power was out, so I went to ask my sister about it. She's 12 years older than me, and she said our parents went out to get the electricity transferred back to Michigan or something. So, power's out, and our parents aren't home. 10-year-old me decides to take my DS and go play a racing game while laying on my parents' bed. Their bed was more comfortable than mine, which was in the master bedroom across the house. The master bedroom doorway goes right into the kitchen and dining room area. This is important. This next section, I remember so vividly still. I was laying on my stomach, playing Cartoon Network Racing, and I just suddenly get this feeling and a voice in my head saying, pause the game and look up, so I did. And when I looked up, I think I stopped breathing. Looking through the doorway into about the middle of the dining room where it turns into the kitchen, there was this tall, I'm talking about 7 feet tall or more, and my dad is 6 feet 2 inches shadow figure, but it wasn't a solid black, it had lights and dark for depth. It looked like a 3D figure just made of darkness. Half of its face looked like it had been blown off with a shotgun. The skin was peeling away from the skull, strands of muscle keeping the sheet from fully flopping down. It was the time of day where sunbeams were coming through the skylight too, going straight through this thing. I don't know how long it stood there just staring at me, but eventually it turned and walked further into the kitchen. Now, I will say before that day, I never understood what people meant by frozen with fear. Now I know, because I was. I don't know how long it had been since it walked away, but I eventually felt my whole body relax, and I was able to breathe. I remember getting off the bed and praying to whatever gods would hear me that it wouldn't still be in there when I walked out and looked to my right. It wasn't there, thank fuck. So I ran over to my rabbit's cage in the dining room to check on her too, and she was sitting in the back of her cage with her ears straight up, eyes wide, and breathing fast. She saw it too. After making sure she was all right, I just took off to my sister's room to wake her up. She didn't sleep at night due to the neighbors, but that's a story for another time, or if anyone is interested, and tell her what happened. I was crying, scared, and shaking. Luckily, my sister said I could sit in her room with her while she slept and play my game quietly at the foot of her bed until her parents got back. I haven't seen that same shadow demon thing since, and I hope it stays that way. This is just one of the events that happened in that house. The most serious of all anyway. But if anyone is interested in the less intense events or happenings, I'll gladly share those stories to edit. Due to popular request, I'll be sharing more events of what happened in this house along with the fucked up neighbors. I'll try to keep these in chronological order, but since it happened a bit over 8 years ago, some events may have blurred together or one could have happened before another. So, here we go. Starting with the neighbors, this will also lead into another experience I had in the house. From the day we moved in, the neighbors didn't like us. Apparently, the people who had lived in the house before us were either family or close friends that had been evicted. So us moving into their old place, they were pissed. When moving stuff in, the neighbor on our right side was walking down the street behind our van while my dad was unloading some stuff. The neighbor was carrying what I believe was a shotgun. When passing my dad, he held it out threateningly and said, "You see this?" As if he wanted us to know he had guns and was basically threatening us. At the same time, my dad was actually removing my sister's scythe from the van. So, kindly return the words with a motion to the scythe. After that, the neighbors would do everything they could to piss us off or try to get us to leave, getting on off-road 4x4s and driving on our side of the property line. hitting our house with said 4x4, and just generally being assholes. My sister never slept because of this at night anyway, because she was terrified they would try to break in and kill us. Her words, not mine. The neighbor dogs, my family believes they knew something was in the house, since they would bark at our house at all hours of the day and night. 2 large, aggressive breed dogs on the left side of our house, and the house across the street had about 8 chihuahuas that were never on leashes and would regularly run over to our yard while we were moving stuff in to try and legit bite our ankles. One night, I can't remember how long after the neighbors first turned to jackasses, I was in the dining room area playing with a toy I had. My mom and sister had gone out to get pizza, so it was just my dad and I home. My dad in his bedroom watching TV. I got this feeling of being watched, and when I looked up, I saw my dad's Homer Simpson Radiohead's eyes were staring straight at me, which is rare since his eyes are the radio knobs and were often left in odd angles on whatever channel was last on. So I got up and turned it away from me and went back to playing. About 5 to 10 minutes later, I got the feeling of being watched again. This time something told me to look to my right, out one of the main bay windows on the front of the house. In the window closest to the computer room, other end of the house, I saw the silhouette of a person's head. This scared the fuck out of me, so I jumped off the chair and ran to tell my dad. When we went back to look, nothing was there. We assumed it was one of the neighbors, since they were fucking weird and still assholes. But it wasn't until after leaving the house that when thinking back on it, I really couldn't tell if that head was inside the house or outside. Besides those 2 personal events, I'd only seen small things like shadows of people stepping away from doorways, arms moving away, etc. Nothing too major, since I'd seen those things in other houses too, which I now know were also occupied by not just my family. Now, I'll mention some things my dad and sister had experienced. I didn't know about these next few things until after I saw my sister's YouTube vlog about the house, which I will link both at the beginning of the post now and at the end of this. My sister would regularly hear child's footsteps running through the house, along with occasional giggling. My dad, one day while getting ready for church in the master bathroom, he had heard what sounded like chanting in the woods behind our house. This wasn't the first time we happened to move into a house or live on property linked to cult activity. First for that was well before I was born. Last event I'll tell of is what happened on our last day of being in that house, a few hours after I saw the shadow demon. Our parents had gotten back with a moving truck, so we were all working to move everything out of the house and onto the truck. When there were only a few things left, a few storage tubs, my sister and I were sitting and reading when we suddenly heard a weird noise. At first, we thought it was wind, but no windows were open in the house, and it sounded like it was coming from the middle of the house. We later agreed it sounded like a man almost howling or saying hello, with it being really drawn out. After searching the house together, we noped the fuck out, and we've not been back since. Fortunately, that shadow demon didn't follow us back to Michigan. My sister has since moved out, and I'm hoping to be moving out within the next year or 2. The rabbit, KTLZ, has since passed away at the age of 9 in 2016 and was not at all related to anything paranormal. The end now we get into story 2, which is titled, I lived in a haunted house where I had to have an exorcism done. My family on my dad's side has had encounters with the spirit world. We're descended from gypsies. My great-grandmother was psychic. My father told me that when he was young, in his early 20s, he was staying at his favorite uncle's house while his uncle was out of town. He heard a knock on the door just after midnight. He said he opened the door and his uncle was standing outside. He said sorry, but he had to go and disappeared in front of him. He had died that night in another city. When I was 13, my father was on a business trip. I woke up in the middle of the night, screaming something's happened to Dad. I dreamed I saw him calling me for help. In the morning, my dad's office called my mother and asked if he flew back home because he hadn't shown up for an important meeting. My mom remembered my hysterical screaming that night and asked them to check his hotel room. They found him. They're unconscious. His room had been broken into, and he had been beaten with a steel pipe. He was in a coma for a few months, but survived. When I was 30, I lived alone in an old 100 years old house that was haunted. I've done tarot readings for years and had always had a positive relationship with the spirits who I invite into my realm when I do readings. But this house had a very dark, uncomfortable energy. The bathroom sink with a mirror was in front of the door when you opened it, and I was too unnerved to take my eyes off the mirror when I brushed my teeth and washed my face. It felt like someone was standing behind me watching me. The house also had a room off the kitchen that I used as a pantry. I could only walk into the room backwards because I could feel something behind me, and I was afraid that it would shut the door and trap me inside. I was so unnerved living there that for the first 2 months, I spent almost every night at a friend's house. To get over my discomfort and try to live there normally, I decided to have a small family luncheon gathering at my place for Easter Sunday and invited my parents, my kid brother, and my other brother and his heavily pregnant fiancée. That day has gone down in infamy in the family lore. After lunch, we went down to the park by the lake close by. My kid brother fell and tore some ligaments in his knee. My parents got into a fender bender, taking him home from emergency. My other brother phoned me that evening because his girlfriend, who started experiencing false pregnancy pains, told him to tell me to stay at their house that night because she got terrible vibes from the house and she kept seeing a black shadow hovering around us. I decided to stay at my own place that night since I didn't feel comfortable imposing on them when she was so close to labor and already feeling pains. I went to bed that night thinking I'd be fine. My bedroom was in the front part of the house with my bed beside a big bay window and had a solid 2-inch thick oak door that opens into the room in front of the closet. I like to close my bedroom door when I'm in for the night. I got under the covers and picked up my book beside my bed. The bedroom door creaked open. Thinking nothing of it, I got up out of bed and shut the door again, went back to bed. The door slowly creaked open again. I got up again and looked over the door and latch, opening and closing it several times. It was a solid, heavy door and made well. The door latch clicked tightly when shut. It could not have been opened by any draft or wind. Shutting the door again, I went back to bed. The door creaked open again. Finding this becoming tiresome, I got back out of bed and this time shutting the door firmly and slightly forcefully. I had just got back into bed when the door opened again, this time as forcefully as I had shut it, and hitting the closet door when it opened. Now I'm pissed, so I get up and slam the door shut. I barely made it on my bed when the door swung open with such force it blew a hole in my closet door. I screamed and grabbed the holy pictures of Christ and Mary and the novenas and rosaries my mom gave me for my Easter house warming, and laid them in a protective semicircle around me as I had my back against my headboard and started reciting every prayer I knew. I could see actual handprints on the bed, reaching towards me, but not getting past the power of God around me. I sat like that until dawn when the hand stopped. Then I threw some clothes into a duffel bag and stayed at a friend's until my parents came back with exorcism instructions and vials of holy water from the priest at their church. We went through every room in that house, saying the rosary and sprinkling holy water. I never felt its presence again and ended up staying there for over a year. Insert comment 1. Ended up staying there for over a year. I would never have felt comfortable living there after that night. Why didn't you move? Response. I was on a 12-month lease, and it would have cost me a month's rent to break it, $850 at the time. I couldn't afford to do that and come up with first and last month's rent for a new place. My parents' attempt at an exorcism worked out well. I never experienced any uncomfortable feelings in the house after that. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. We will now move on to story number 3, which is titles. I S My Phil Haunting Our House. I've been having an experience I can't explain. I would like some opinions on it. My husband and I have been married 25 years. We are living in a house he grew up in. His dad lived here until the weekend he died, but he did not die in the home. His dad was very attached to stuff. Think moderate hoarder tendencies. So when this first started happening, we attributed it to him, but now I don't think so. For the past 10 years, I randomly hear my husband's voice say, "Hey," from the kitchen door leading to the garage. I'm always alone when it happens, and the first several times it was always raining. Not sure if this is important. Well, we're skeptics. I've had weird things happen to me as a kid, but have managed to explain them all away over the years. So at first I attributed it to maybe the TV/radio was on, maybe a window was cracked, and I was hearing a neighbor. Our houses are not close together, by the way. Maybe I took a medicine that is making me hear things. My husband said his dad's voice sounded like his when his dad was younger, and if anyone would be attached to a house, it would have been him. So for a while we chalked it up to that. But then it happened again the other day when I was coming in from outside and was just a few feet from the kitchen door. It was definitely not his dad's voice. It was my husband's voice, clear as day, always the same inflection and everything. Hey, all happy sounding. It was so clear that I opened the door to make sure he hadn't come home from work early, but I was alone. WTF? Am I crazy? Can you even be haunted by someone who's still alive? Is this one of those moments in time recorded and playing back, even though this last time it wasn't raining? I'm very logical and not at all interested in pseudosciences, and this is annoying me. It has never made me feel afraid. It actually makes me feel warm and loved inside when it happens. The END, please comment your thoughts and theories on your favorite story, and don't forget to subscribe for more confession shadow secrets.